It is the Two Guys Garage Podcast. He is Kevin Bird. I am Willie B. Fired up today because today we're introducing video as well. Man, how about that? How you
Nice.
like
Well,
them
I don't know about
apples?
everybody watching right now. They might be like, "Ooh, let me just go back to the audio part." You know, that was much better. I didn't have to look at you guys. This is way better.
Ooh,
But
man,
yeah,
we got a face for radio. Well, welcome to our shops. I'm glad you guys are here. Man, we got a show for you today because we're talking, with one of the industry leaders. Aeromotive has always been in that fueling game, fuel pumps, regulators. If you're a racer, if you got a fast car, chances are you know these guys very well, whether it's inline, in tank, T-style, mechanical. They got a pump to fit whatever your application is, ways to get it there. And today's modern horsepower, dude, it's a must. So I'm excited to talk to Brett and get the game on. But first, man, I got to know, Bird, what's
oh
behind you?
yeah, I got a couple behind me. Yeah, I got a
Oh, what is that?
65
Oh,
fastback,
what is that?
all kind of cut up and chopped up,
Man.
ready to get kind of nasty. So that's that one.
Yeah,
and I got
man.
another 70 fastback sitting over here. That one's all painted, ready to kind of get built. And I see you got something in the background over there too.
I got a whole lot of motocross and drag racing trophies, and one of several Mopars or old school hot rods you'll see probably in the shadows there. That's the 70 Roadrunner. We actually had that on the show. Maybe towards the end of the podcast, Kevin will remind you guys what you might have missed behind the scenes. That's always a pretty funny topic of conversation.
You have to stick around for that one. It's pretty good. It's one of Willie's early
Yeah.
episodes on Two Guys Garage, and he showed up to the party ready to play. I give him tons of credit. So stories
Yeah,
at
man.
the end.
Now let's talk fueling your car, man. For so many of us, it started out as that was one of the big improvements. When you start going up in horsepower, you got to get more fuel, more air, more horsepower. And man, the guys we're speaking of today, Aeromotive, have been in that game for so long, and they're a must on so many of my cars. I probably got, me, man. I got a pretty good collection of old hot rods and old big blocks sitting out in the shop, and majority of fuel pumps you're going to see on the frame rails or in the tanks are branded Aeromotive. I really rely on these guys heavily, and I'm glad we're able to talk to them on the podcast and see what's new, what's going on, and what's happening in their world, because it's changing
Oh
just
man,
like
things have
everything
been
else.
progressing. I mean, you go back in the day, you had a big mechanical fuel pump, the electric pumps that you'd mount somewhere that make a lot of noise, and things have just progressed from there. We got a lot of in tank, and I think Aeromotive kind of were the pioneers for getting really cool options for, let's say, how to easily modify a tank for a drop-in in-tank solution. They run cooler, they're quieter.
Nice.
You get a lot more life out of them that way. So what an awesome development, but they haven't stopped. Every time I turn around, they've got a different style of pump, and I'm pretty excited. We touched on it. It's probably been at least 2 years or more. We talked about their brushless gear pump. So I've forgotten a lot of what we talked about before, and I haven't gotten one in my hands to really kind of sink it in. So I think we'll touch base on that and regulators. Right? There's so many different systems on how to set up a regulator, and I think a lot of people get confused. So we're going to break all that down and simplify it. We got Brett Clow from Aeromotive, man. Brett, thanks for joining us. This is going to be awesome. He's the technical director at Aeromotive. I've worked with him over the years, so it's great to have him. It's kind of that expert advice on how to set up a system right.
Hey
Thanks
guys.
for joining us. Yeah, how long have you
Hey,
been at
man.
Aeromotive now?
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if I want to actually admit to that. It's been over 20 years. Let's put it that way.
That's a good path. But quick question for you, man. Being there, you got to see all this evolution in how to get the fuel where you need it inside that engine. For you guys, it's got to be kind of a wild ride watching all these. Kevin mentioned these frame sort of mounted inline
Yep.
pumps. I've still got
Yep.
several of them on a couple of my old Chargers out in the shop
Right.
because they've not stopped working. They're nitrous cars. They provide all the
Yep.
power I need. They're reliable, and I just I know they're always working. So I'm not even upgrading a few of mine, even though I've had them for a decade plus. They just keep working.
This is it, and it has been a wild ride because the A1000 pump when we first came out with our high performance fuel pump supporting 1,000 horsepower, it was kind of like the the pipe dream for most people who were building a hot rod to
Yeah.
make 1,000
Yeah.
horsepower. We're at a point today where if somebody calls us and says they're not making 1,000 horsepower, at
Right, right.
least we're like, oh, what's wrong?
Yeah, you better catch up.
It's just amazing how things have changed, and we've been driven by this demand for increasing horsepower and the fuel that's needed to support that. It's really we're somewhat the tail the dog wags, right? I mean, people come to us and they're like, "Well, we're making this extra more, 500 more, 1,000 more, 2,000 more." I mean, when we came out with our first mechanical fuel pump, which was a 6 gallon a minute mechanical pump, G rotor style, and we were putting it on a couple of cars that were making like 1,800 horsepower on gasoline, and those were crazy numbers. We're like, my goodness, what a 6 gallon a minute pump? Now we have 5 gallon, 7 gallon, and 10 gallon a minute electric pumps that
Yeah.
are actually driven by an electric motor.
Now, everybody knows Aeromotive for a lot of reasons. When it comes to fueling your car, getting that gas, that fuel, whether it's, premium unleaded, race gas, E85, or, methanol, getting it into that engine where we want it, man, that's a much more demanding task than what you may think. Especially when you're talking all these high horsepower combinations, all these crazy, evolutions of the fuel pump. Let's start out with some of the old school stuff, like you kind of see behind me, big block, with a little bit of nitrous, talking to, 700 horsepower style car,
Yep.
running your on the frame type pump. Those are kind of a dying breed nowadays, but obviously something you cut your teeth on and still very proud of in the industry because they've worked for so long and have
Yeah.
been so good.
I'll tell you a quick anecdotal story. I had a guy call me um, years ago, actually, and he said, "I have an A1000 pump, and I'd really like to send it in and have you guys check it out and maybe rebuild it." And I said, "Okay, um, what's going on with it?" And he goes, "Well, nothing really." And, and I said, "Okay, well, we'd be happy to take a look at it for you, but is there any reason you really need to send it in?" And he goes, "Well, I've got 100,000 miles on it, and I'd really like to have it checked out."
Wow.
And I said, "Okay." Well, that was exciting, right? And it was really cool. We ended up having him send the pump in with a couple of filters, and we said, "Look, if you can give us a testimonial, we'll write a little article, we'll do a quarter page or a half page ad with your car in it. We'll take the pump, we'll take it to SEMA." And we had it at SEMA on display for years
So cool.
because it's just emblematic of the quality that we build into the product. And what he had done, which is what we ask everybody to do, is put the system together the way we request. Use our filters, use our regulator, use the recommended size line. And if you do that, you can get tremendous results. And he had, and we were happy to acknowledge that. That was
Yeah,
fun.
my main street car, 83 at the rear tires on the street tune, a little bit more on the race tune.
Yep.
The last time I had it on a dyno, and that thing has been on an Aeromotive pump, I think now for 9, 10 years, and I wear it
Awesome.
out every season, man.
Yeah.
I'm out there banging on it, just
That's pretty
driving the hell
impressive,
Great.
out of it.
from the pump
That's
side
great.
and the vehicle to get 100,000 miles. I assume you had some kind of hot rod. I dream of getting 100,000 miles on a hot rod.
Yep.
Living up north in the snow and,
Yeah.
very short summers, that doesn't help at all.
Yeah.
But
I could tell you so many anecdotal stories. It's so much fun. But yeah, it's isn't that the dream, right? Everybody wants a car that goes fast and they can drive on the street and that's reliable and dependable. I mean, it's the
well,
best
hey,
of all
you talked
worlds.
about the filtration. While we're here, why don't you hit us up real
Mhm.
quick and remind everybody
Yeah,
what type of pre-filter and post-filter that you guys recommend? What size? How many microns?
sure. Well, so from a micron rating, and this is a good question, right? Microns is half the equation. The other half of the equation is how many inches of surface area do you have on the element at that micron rating? So to answer the first part of the question, pre-filters need to be coarse. They need to be high flow. They're rock screens. Fundamentally, they're designed to keep the big stuff out of the pump. And what we don't want is something that's going to restrict the flow on the suction side of the pump. Our pumps can make a tremendous amount of vacuum, but vacuum is not friendly to liquid, and especially a liquid that's unstable like gasoline. So when you have a restrictive element on the suction side of a pump and it's making a lot of vacuum to get fuel, it's going to be prone to hot fuel handling and vapor lock problems because in a vacuum fuel goes to vapor at a much lower temperature. So we recommend a 100 micron stainless element. We have at this point, I can count 5 different 100 micron elements that go from small to 16 AN, right? From 3/8 pipe to AN 16. The right filter is going to be the one that we recommend in our system diagrams on our website for that particular pump. It's going to be sized so that it's invisible to the pump. It can flow all the fuel the pump can pump. It can protect it without restricting it. On the pressure side of the pump, we're going to run depends. Carbureted, normally a 40 micron filter is fine enough. And by the way, micron rating is confusing. People think of it as like microscopic, and sometimes they'll mistake the 100 micron number to be finer than the 10, but it's actually the opposite. A 100 micron filter will stop theoretically particles that are 100 micron in diameter and larger, and a 99 micron particle would pass through, whereas a 10 micron or a 40 micron filter is going to stop those smaller particles and let them, let the smaller ones go through, but stop the bigger ones. So we go 100 on the suction side, 40 on the pressure side for carbureted, and on the EFI stuff, we go down to 10 micron, which is 10 times finer than 100, because we're trying to protect that sensitive fuel injector and that mechanism to keep it from sticking or clogging up, or the screens in the injectors from loading up and denying the fuel to a
You made a
particular
great point
cylinder.
about the suction side, and that's kind of one of the drivers for pushing the pump closer and closer and getting it actually in the tank. Is you're reducing how much
Hmm.
restriction that pump is trying to pull, because they can push all day, but suction of any
Yep.
pump can be limited, right, and cause cavitation and other issues like you mentioned. So, we've got these, A1000s. I think we've all put in vehicles over time, and they're awesome. But as we migrate, as
Yep.
we get smarter, better, as the hardware's available, getting that pump in the tank is just one more step towards eliminating any possible issues.
Well, reliability again is at the forefront of consideration, and I mean, you look at the OEM world, and you're just not going to see a new vehicle with a pump that's not in the tank, and it really boils down to reliability.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll talk to people, and they'll ask me, "Well, I want a pump that can go outside the tank," and I'll ask them why, and they'll say, "Well, because I don't want to have to hassle with getting the tank down to replace the pump." And I'm like, "Well, that's a fair consideration, but how many more times do you want to replace the pump if it's outside the
Right.
tank than if
It's
it's
hot
inside the
out
tank?"
there. It's near
Right?
the tarmac.
It's like, "Well, I never
Yeah.
really thought
Near
about that."
corrosion.
Yeah,
I mean, it just,
exactly. Yeah, that's
yeah,
right.
not a happy place. You would think, well, I wouldn't want to put it in
Yeah.
the gasoline, but you know
Well,
what? A pump is pretty happy in the gasoline.
Yeah,
y'all
it's a
say
happy
that like
camper on the bottom.
both you guys say that like you've never owned a 2004 through 14 Dodge Durango, which everybody knows you got to replace that fuel pump about every year
Right.
and a half.
Yeah, well, and unfortunately, gasoline has changed over the years, and some of those old pumps, darn, they don't like the new modern gasoline either, so that's always a
Well,
challenge,
that
and we've had
brings
to
up a
adapt to that over the years too.
that brings up another question. So many cars. I've got a 67 Barracuda in the shop back there, 527 cubic inch big block, but it runs on
Oh, yeah.
E85. Now,
Mhm.
E85 does a lot of damage if
Oh
you're not
yeah.
ready for it, to the lines and most definitely the pump. Um,
Well, that's
talk a
a
little
big
bit about
curveball for
yeah,
for fuel delivery because of the reasons you just mentioned, right? The corrosion aspects of alcohol versus gasoline, right? And when you put ethanol into a tank that's been in gasoline for years, what the first thing it's going to do is strip all of that shellac that's accumulated on the inside of the tank, and that's going through the pumps, that's going through the filters and clogging the filters up. But E85 is another big deal in that you burn 30% more fuel
yeah.
for the same power on ethanol as you
Hmm.
do on gasoline. And that was a major force in driving us to develop more and bigger and higher flow fuel pumps because the flow volume required to make the same power is 30% more on E85. So yeah, there's lots of driving forces and aspects of what keeps
Well,
us on
speaking
our
of
toes, if you
driving,
will.
all this
Yeah, and it's
fuel, right, between all the horsepower and especially, like you said, E85, where you need that much and more, 30% more, it's driven you into
Yep.
different types of pumps. The latest
Yeah.
and greatest seems to be from you guys, the brushless type series. Can you explain the evolution into that, and what are the why buys for stepping up to that type of pump?
Sure. Well, I guess there's a couple of aspects, right? Number one, just the the raw volume required, right? When we came out with our 5 gallon a minute brushless gear pump, it was like, holy mackerel, that's huge. That is so much flow. And it really is. It's a tremendous amount of flow. And that's now in the middle of a group of 3.5, 5, and 7, and 10 gallon a minute brushless pumps.
Can,
The
can
why
you
go
explain? Hey,
brushless?
hey, Brett, can you explain for
Yeah.
somebody that may not quite fully understand how much fuel we're talking? Can you give us a garden hose reference, or a like? I feel like some people just don't quite understand how much fuel that is actually moving when you say, uh, that number 5 gallons per minute. That's an insane amount of fuel.
It
It's just
really is.
nuts.
I mean, I had one of our clients who I won't name, but who does some really good carburetor stuff, a lot of blow through carburetors, big horsepower stuff. And he I sent him a 5 gallon a minute pump just for his flow bench. And he just hooked a hose up to it and he runs mineral spirits. And he says, I just left the other end of the hose open and turned it on. And he said, Jesus, it shot clear across the shop. It's like
was
a fire hose.
was
Yeah, he was amazed at how much
full
flow comes
bore,
out of that pump.
with your foot on it, that's a 5 gallon bucket in a minute. You
Yep,
know,
that's
if
exactly right.
if
That's
you're if
exactly
you're
right.
thinking about just take out your 5 gallon bucket, how long does it take you to fill up with your garden hose? Well, I
Yeah,
Right,
no
guarantee it's longer
doubt.
than a minute. Where
right,
and a fuel
right.
pump is doing that for a car, consuming all of that in a pass and a run in a minute. So it's amazing to think about what these small fuel pumps are actually doing when he gives numbers like 5 gallons, 7 gallons, 10 gallons a minute. It's really unbelievable the volume and how much force is behind it.
Yeah, well, and then the pressures too as they go up. But just to kind of give you the so what happened is we're we're developing a line of spur gear mechanical pumps to meet the horsepower requirements in the of course methanol has changed things as well, right? So you take a gasoline burning engine, you go to ethanol, you burn 30% more. You go to methanol, now you've doubled the fuel consumption from ethanol to methanol for the same power. So if it takes 1 gallon a minute to do it on gasoline, it takes 1.3 gallons a minute to make the same power on ethanol, and it takes 2.6 gallons a minute to make that same power on methanol. And of course, as we go up in fuel and octane, we make more and more and more power. So we're doing these big spur gear pumps for the big pro mods and the alcohol funny cars and la di da. And we're like, this spur gear stuff is really solid. It's really reliable. It's kind of noisy, but man, it makes so much volume. And we're like, can we take that and evolve that into an electric driven pump? And when you start moving that much volume, the amount of work you're doing is a ton. And the motor to drive, I mean, on our flow bench for our medium to smaller mechanical pumps, we run a 5 horse, 3 phase electric motor. Well, if you can imagine what a 5 horse, 12-volt electric motor looks like, it's like 45, 50 pounds. I mean, there's no way you're going to put that on a pump and put it in your car. It's ridiculous. So how do we take that spur gear pumping mechanism and drive that thing with something that's reasonably packaged, small, lighter weight, and keep the current draw from going, off the chart? And the brushless motor technology was the
Hmm.
key to that. So we were able to take a pumping mechanism that can move a lot of fuel, develop a motor that had enough torque, enough balls to run that motor, run that pumping mechanism, and keep the current draw from getting insane. And that was really, I mean, it was all about finding technology to take it to the next level. And it was the brushless motor that was a part of that.
Yeah, anybody that's owned an RC car in the last 5 to 10 years, remember those little nitro methane cars that people would try to
Oh,
fire
yeah.
up and rumble,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I'd
I
show up
had
my
some.
brushless, yeah, my brushless, and it'd run 70 miles an hour in circles
Rip,
around those guys. Or the first time you
right?
saw the brushless, you got your DeWalt or your Rigid tool or whatever. First time you got that brushless drill, and it's like you're like, whoa, there's something with
Yeah,
this,
can you
Yeah,
imagine
man.
they're
back in
pretty
the day if you
amazing.
wanted to run a gear pump that hard to run a little nitro motor instead of a brushless motor to drive your fuel pump? That's probably a bad idea, right?
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah,
all kinds of
definitely,
Right.
bad,
definitely.
all
So
kinds of
thank
bad.
God for the
Oh,
brushless.
yeah.
So what kind of amperage does it require to run these things now?
Well, it varies depending on the pump. So the worst case scenario, for example, our biggest brushless gear pump, which is the 10 gallon a minute pump, at 100 psi is going to draw
60
60
amps.
amps, but it's moving 9.5 gallons a minute at 100 psi and still just
God.
drawing 60 amps. So it's
Yeah,
pretty amazing. Yeah,
That
no
is kind
doubt.
of nuts when you think about it. Wow.
yeah.
Wow. You got to love what Aeromotive has done for, not just racing, but all types and applications and everything from crazy fast race cars and pro mods and street cars to, everything in between, muscle cars, modern muscle. It's amazing what you're seeing out on the street nowadays. And I'm sure you guys have followed suit because these modern cars, dude, have you not been blown away that you can walk into a dealership now and buy 1,000 horsepower car? It's
Well,
ridiculous.
you're absolutely right. And this is the thing too, that the OEM has led in so many ways. You look at the evolution of a mod motor Ford engine, you look at the evolution of the LS series of engines,
Oh yeah.
the kind of power that these things can produce with, you know, and then you take
Brett, you
turbochargers
forgot
No,
and
one.
no, you
throw
Brett, you
them in
didn't.
there.
forgot one. Hemi.
Yes. Oh, and don't the Hemi and the oh yeah, trust me. I was gonna get
Hemi.
there. The Hellcat and the
uh,
demon red eye and the oh my gosh,
oh yeah,
right? It's
man.
just out. It's just out of control. So yeah, and now, you take the factory stuff and you make some minor mods, you tweak the cylinder heads, you do a little camshaft and you make another 500
Yeah, it's like
horsepower.
falling
Yeah,
off a
yeah.
log,
It's
Put
like,
a
man.
bigger lid on it. It's
wow,
crazy.
No
it's
doubt.
crazy. Well, we did that mod motor Ford for Steven when Steve Matuzik, and that was a 327 cubic inch mod motor, kind of a tall block D-stroke deal. And on Duttweiler's dyno, on just a baseline tune-up, that stupid little thing made
Oof,
2,000 horsepower,
oof.
Wow.
and that was with 20, maybe 25 pounds of boost. We went out and raced that thing and made 35, 40 pounds of boost, and I know we made 25, 2,600 horsepower on 327 cubic inches on
That's just
gasoline.
Yeah.
absurd. That is just so wrong.
So that just illustrates the what you're saying and makes a great point is that was a stock cylinder head and a stock block. I mean, I did the cylinder head port work on it. We developed a camshaft with comp cams, but it was a stock engine, man.
No
It's crazy
doubt.
stuff.
No doubt.
How are you guys been keeping up with the fueling demands with all these different applications? Because it's wild. Some tanks are split. Some tanks,
Yep.
are big, deeper. There's so many things going on. We're trying to fuel these cars can keep up with that demand. How have you guys sort of met that demand on your end?
Well, we're constantly evolving that. So, the split tank is what's going on there, right? Is that I mean, the OEM got sued into you know what, and they had to
Yeah.
move the fuel tanks ahead of the rear end. When they did that, if you have a rear wheel drive car and the drive shaft has to bisect the gas tank, you got two gas tanks, man. There's no way around that.
Sucks.
So, yeah, there's a jet siphon type of a technology that's used there, and it's really cool stuff. And we've actually got a patented Apex jet siphon pump that we've created that's self-priming. We can use that in a dual tank setup if we need to. We
Hmm.
can also use it in rock crawlers and off-road racers and off-angle stuff where we can have a pump in one part of the tank and the pickup from the jet siphon in another part of the tank. And you could be nose up and the pump's in the front of the tank and the jet siphon's pumping fuel to the foam and bladder baffle in the front where the pump is, so you never run out of fuel. We've done so many cool things, but that's a
Hmm.
great point
Wow.
is that modern fuel delivery is more and more complicated. A lot of this changed in '99 when we went to basically EPA, EEC, or evaporative emission control standards changed in '99. The OEM had to get away from a regulator on the stock fuel rail, and they had to go to a regulator in the tank, or they had to go to pulse modulated control of the pump to vary the speed of the pump to hit the target pressure. It got a lot more complex. And the fuel systems actually it took a back seat, really. I mean, the dynamic system pumping fuel to the rail back to the tank is the best way to deliver fuel to an injector. Um, but um, they had to do what they had to do, right? They had to keep the fuel temperature down in the tank. After a 12-hour drive, they had to park the car in a room. They had to measure the VOC off the car. And if it had too much VOC, it wouldn't qualify. You couldn't sell the car in the US. So they couldn't recycle fuel anymore
Stupid.
because they couldn't warm the fuel in the tank because it wouldn't pass, right? So that was the whole transition to pulse modulated control of the pump, to regulators in the tank with the pump, et cetera. And and so now, we have technology that can actually work with
So
all
how
of
do
that
you
if need be.
navigate that? So right,
Wow.
you've got a couple different scenarios. Obviously, you got the carburetor stuff, but from a fuel injection side, you've got completely standalone. So you've got an aftermarket controller on whatever engine, and then you've got OE stuff that you
Yep.
can make work. Well, whether it's an OE
Hmm.
vehicle with OE system, and you're doing some upgrades,
Right.
or you're doing an OE controller, a standalone LS or standalone Coyote or whatever it is, and you're putting it in a hot rod. So how do you navigate the
Hmm.
style of regulator and return or returnless based on, I assume, the controller?
Dude, you call them and have them tell you.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
call those
it's
guys and have them tell you, "Hey, I did the same thing like 9 years ago."
right, right. It's a matter of kind of getting a feel for the lay of the land as to what the end user wants to do. Um, in some cases, they have the OEM ECU and they maybe have a new harness coming from another company, and it might have the fuel pump driver module built into that harness, or it might not. We get some, not to beat up on the OEM, but you know, there's a company that would tell their customers, I won't name any names, that I'll just set the regulator for 72 psi and just drive it. And if it's a direct injection engine and you're going to set and and when you look at what really happens in the OEM, they run the fuel pump at between 40 and 60 psi 99% of the time. The only time the pressure goes up to 72 is a wide open throttle. And the reason they do that is because fuel pumps don't like to live at 72 psi constant, right? Fuel gets hot, pumps wear out, brush and commutator goes out in those motors because they're little in tank pumps. If you run at 72, 75 psi, that sounds good until you have to actually go drive your car like that. So, what I'm typically going to ask is, okay, can you put the fuel pump driver module back in the harness? And if you can, we can set something up in the tank that you can pulse modulate the pressure. If not, then let's put a regulator up by this engine and let's set the pressure for 60. If it's a boosted engine, the pressure will go up to 72 with boost, right? We can do a vacuum boost reference on the regulator. And I know that was one of the
Hmm.
questions you wanted to talk about earlier is what do you do with vacuum and boost? But we can take advantage of that in a bypass regulator to make the pressure go up when we need it to and go down when we don't. Now, on direct injection engines, that really has nominal effect on how the engine runs, right? You have a pump built into the engine that's making 2, 3, 4,000 psi feeding direct injectors. The amount of pressure you feed that pump with is not as critical as it might seem. I mean, on a 8 injector, 2 fuel rail, s- PI or port injected engine, fuel pressure in the fuel rail is critical. If it changes and it's not supposed to, it
Yeah,
immediately
if you think
affects how
about your
much fuel
garden
goes in the
hose, right,
engine.
with the sprayer nozzle,
Yeah.
barely crack the
Yep.
valve with your nozzle fully open, and there's your
Yep.
stream. And then
Yep.
crank that valve open, you
Yep.
can see how much flow difference there is. And if your computer's just going off of time,
Absolutely.
right, how long did you squeeze the
Yep.
handle? It's assuming there's a certain amount of flow
Yep.
that came out.
A constant pressure is going to deliver a constant and predictable fuel flow per millisecond of open time. That's huge, and that's a key point. And I like the sprayer, concept because people can get a grasp of you squeeze it, it's open, it flows. And if the pressure is constant, you get the same amount of flow per second that you hold it. And that's the whole idea is you want predictable fuel flow. With a direct
Well, there's the
injection
word
engine,
predictable. Exactly. You can work with
exactly.
Yeah.
predictable. Yeah.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
and
And
everybody
that's
knows that.
why by the way, we use vacuum and boost reference on fuel pressure regulators. So this is a good segue for that topic, right? So what are we managing when we manage fuel pressure in the fuel rail is we're managing the inlet pressure on the injector. What about the pressure on the outlet side of the injector? What's that doing? Because if we have a naturally aspirated engine, when we know atmospheric pressure is 14.5 psi, right?
Yep.
So when the engine is technically in a state of vacuum at idle and cruise, it's really just pressure that's less than atmosphere. But when that injector opens, if there's a negative pressure in the intake and the fuel rail pressure hasn't come down an equal amount, we have a differential pressure that's changing. Okay. If we tag the fuel pressure regulator to the intake manifold and the manifold goes into vacuum and the fuel pressure comes down an equal amount, the differential pressure stays the same. And the injected fuel is predictable. It's the same amount of fuel per millisecond of open time. When we go into boost and we raise the fuel pressure the same amount as we have positive pressure in the intake manifold, all we're doing is making sure the difference between the two
Right.
doesn't
So going
change.
back to that,
So
squirt nozzle on your hose, right? If you don't touch the valve and you got it whatever
yeah,
setting you want and you're squirting it, right, it's going to flow that predictable amount. But
yeah,
now you put some kind of pressure in
yeah,
front of it, like boost, right? You're going to slow down. You're going to
yeah,
restrict how much fuel comes out. Or if you were to pull a vacuum, more water would come out of that
yeah,
nozzle. So would you set up
exactly,
a
exactly.
regulator with manifold pressure for naturally aspirated, or only for boost when you're going above a certain horsepower or pressure within the manifold?
On a blow through carburetor, basically, so we're back to this example of what we're trying to do with a fuel pressure reference to manifold pressure is we're trying to make the fuel rail pressure mirror the manifold pressure so they are tracking with each other and the difference between the two doesn't change. So we get predictable flow through the injector. Now with a blow through carburetor, we're compressing air through the carburetor into the intake manifold and we're pressurizing the flow bowls through those vent tubes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Those two vent tubes are basically, so when we have 10 pounds of air pressure in the intake, it's 10 pounds of air pressure between the blower and the back of the intake valve, right? And those two vent tubes in the carburetor flow bowls are
Right.
pressurized as well. So we have 10 pounds of air pressure in the flow bowl. If we don't raise the fuel pressure an equal amount, by the time we hit 7 pounds of boost, the differential is zero, and we're not putting any
Ah,
fuel in the flow bowl. And at 10 pounds of boost, we're blowing bubbles in the fuel system, right? We got to get the pressure to go up to the inlet of the flow bowl. Well, if a guy hooks up
Wait, and
that,
stop, pause that right there. And that's
yes,
why nobody ever uses blow through carburetors anymore. Okay, proceed. Yeah, okay,
um,
yeah.
and I will have to say, and
good
not to
point, Willie.
correct you,
Yeah.
Well, I
but
know there's a few. I'm out there. Yeah,
I
yeah.
just got off the phone with a client a couple weeks ago who does nothing but blow through carburetors, and he made 30 to 100
Wow.
horsepower at the tire on methanol with
Okay.
a
All right.
carburetor
All right. If you
and
can,
a pro
Wow.
charger.
It's just showing off.
yeah, if you can,
Insane
whew,
numbers.
man.
And
Insane. But
and
but
everybody spends a lot of time dialing that in.
well, and let me tell you, if you don't have a good carburetor and your carburetor guy doesn't know what he's doing, a blow through carburetor can be a nightmare, right? And there's a handful of really good guys that know how to do it. I'm not going to name names again, but call me if you have a question on that. I can always refer you. Um, but yeah, it's so if you hook up a carburetor boost reference regulator on a blow through to the manifold, the guy will start the car and he'll go drive it. And as the manifold goes into vacuum, fuel pressure will go to zero and
Mm-hmm.
it'll shut off
Okay.
And
because
he's like,
he's
should have
looking at
gone a fuel
vacuum.
injection.
Right, right. Should have gone. Should have gone fuel. So anyway, just a. I'm probably off the topic, but
No, man,
hopefully
it's
that
great
makes
that you
sense.
know all of this, which is why everybody comes to you with problems, which is why you guys have been kind of
Yeah,
the,
they
the
do that.
go-to when it comes to any of these issues, because so many people wouldn't know that. They wouldn't understand, all the, sort of nuances about making it perfect. And that's
Yep,
what we're trying to do, get all these bugs and hiccups and all these hurdles over with so we can go drive and ride and enjoy our cars, whether it's
yep,
500, 1,000, 1,500 or more horsepower.
yeah.
And you guys have been a huge part of that. Where do people see you and find you socially? How can they reach you for some of this knowledge when they have hurdles or a blow through car situation they need handled? Where do
Right.
people find you?
Well, our website at www.aeromotiveinc.com, which is really almost overwhelming. There is so much great information there. There's under the tech help section, there's a whole set of frequently asked questions for regulators and fuel pumps. There's technical bulletins, which are specific to topics and detailed and good information. There is a power planner where you can actually plug in some of your parameters and it'll help you pick a pump. There's a set of system diagrams for just about everything we make that shows you filters, line sizes, pumps, regulators to help you get all of the system, put together correctly. You can call us 913-647-7300, and you can dial 2 to get directly into the tech department. And we've got some great guys here that can answer your questions. I know we have a Facebook page. I'm not the social media guy, and I probably my
I
people on
thought for
my end are
sure
probably
you were
going to
going to say
kick me
you
in the
were.
butt, right? Because they're like, you should be saying, well, we probably have an Instagram page. I know we have a Facebook page. I don't know a lot about them, though. I apologize.
Well, you gave us the need to know, which is
Right.
aeromotiveinc.com. That's where we're going to find all the bulletins, all the tech, and all the info they could ever want. Or you could find our show, which airs weekends on the Motor Trend Network. Check your local listings. It's also available on Motor Trend Plus, which is their streaming format. Thanks to our guest, Brett. Aeromotiveinc.com. Our producer, Scoop, executive producer, Bob Ecker. He's Kevin Bird, and I'm Willie B.
Yeah, and for other cool things, you can check out our website, twoguysgarage.com. You can share your thoughts with us. We're on social. We definitely are on social, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And I'll tell you where, at Two Guys Garage. This is Two Guys Garage Podcast. It's copyright 2023, Brenton Productions Incorporated. All rights reserved.
All right, so Brett, I gotta ask you, man. What's the one old school
Yeah.
hot rod that you let go, but you still dream you wish you had?
1962 Impala SS.
Nice.
No, four speed.
Yeah, it was a black car
Oh,
with bucket seats and a 409. It was.
Oh,
I never should have sold that car, but it wasn't
ooh,
in great running condition when I owned it, and I was a young guy. I
did
was
you
in
say
my late teens, early
409?
20s.
Ooh,
409.
four speed.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh my God, that is
nice.
a, whew, that's a retire early car nowadays.
It's a really stupid thing I did when I sold that car.
Ooh, what'd you
You know,
sell it
I had
for?
another one of my favorites. One of my early hot rods was a let me think here. 60 what the hell, 66 Impala. No, it was I'm sorry, Pontiac. It wasn't it was Le Mans. It wasn't the GTO, but it was the six-cylinder inline overhead cam Le Mans with the four-barrel carburetor and the split dual exhaust from the factory. It was a 10-to-1 motor with a belt-driven overhead camshaft. I rebuilt that engine. It was my first engine rebuild in high school. And I used to go out and smoke those 327 guys. They hated me.
That's crazy, crazy
Yeah, it was
cool.
fun. Yeah.
Well, man, thanks for your time and the knowledge. We'll talk to you again soon. It was an awesome podcast, man.
Thanks,
All
Brett.
right.
All right, guys, hope you learned something. You know where to
Bye,
go if
guys.
you didn't catch it all. But we will catch you on the next Two Guys Garage Podcast.